Good morning and welcome to CouncilMatters on this bright and breezy Dublin weekend. I'm Mick Fitz, and very shortly we will be bringing you, at no expenses spared, Cllr Noel Rock, who represents Ballymun, Whitehall, Glasnevin, and quite a few places in between. And later on, we're going to be joined by PeterD. Peter, you may recall, is the singing accountant who chanteuses out there at the GPO when the weather is a bit warmer than it is today. But I gather we've got Noel on the line, so good morning, Cllr Rock.
Good morning, Mick. How are you?
No expenses spared. Did you like the pun?
Not sure about no expenses spared.
No expenses. No expenses. Space spared. Yeah. You were very prominent in that claim at the time, Noel, in the sense that you said you would not take expenses. How has that been received? Has that gone down as well as it should?
Certainly it's gone down well among regular people, you know. I mean, I did it for two reasons, I suppose, Mick. One was because I didn't agree with the idea of unvouched or unreceipted expenses. You know, I don't think that's fair. I think anybody in a normal job, if they're lucky enough to get expenses for their job, would have to submit receipts and all that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
As opposed to just getting a lump sum. So I didn't agree with that, and that was my stand against it. And then secondly, people who in their own lives maybe have found the last 3 or 4 or 5 years a bit financially more difficult or strained than before, I think appreciate the gesture on my part to give back money to the City Council, to allow the City Council to, you know, fulfil vital services and so on, instead of just lining my own pockets, because there's been a lot of cynicism about politics in the last 10 years.
It is. It's interesting you should note that, because more or less as a public service, when the figures for expenses, TD's expenses, were published last week, I extracted the ones for Dublin Bay North and put it into a JPEG, and it's fascinating to see the response. It wasn't one I expected. People really don't like to see people getting expenses that we don't actually know what they're getting them for. Is that a mood you're finding out there?
Absolutely. It's very much commonly shared, and I mean, that is one of the motivating factors behind me doing it. And, you know, even say if we look at TDs and their travel allowances, I think people, you can knock them over with a feather when you tell them that a TD gets €9,000 if they're based in Dublin every single year just to travel to and from the Dáil. That's €9,000 without any questions asked.
That's a lot of bus fares, isn't it?
An awful lot of bus fares. My Leaf card comes to about 20 quid a week, you know, so you do wonder, where's the rest of the money going?
Well, I'll leave this subject very quickly, but I'll just digress and say the last public representative I saw on public transport, and I give him credit, was Sean Kenny about a year ago, and he was getting the 29 out to Raheny. So you don't see a lot. That's all I will say on the subject. But moving on to transport, Noel. We've had proposals for a transport plan for North Dublin, and I know that you're going to have a meeting about that tomorrow night, which we will talk about. But for those of us who are old hacks on this subject, it's got a sense of deja vu, because I remember the last time I recovered this, it was going to be something going up on sticks up the Ballymun road, and it was going to be something like a monorail or something like that. And what I always remember is that the preferred route happened to go through the constituencies of both Noel and Bertie Ahern. I mean, so nothing came of that. What's the status of this one then, Noel? Is it just a proposal?
Yeah, at the minute it is just a proposal, and I can completely understand anybody's cynicism, because it does have a kind of a feel of kind of being there and heard that before. The proposal you're talking about, the Metro North, ultimately was derailed before it got on rails, if you like, because of cost more than anything else, and because of the deteriorating condition of the nation's finances at the time. So what's happened here is they carried out a North Dublin transport study, they call it. The National Transport Authority did that. And they kind of, you know, had a review of everything, every conceivable route and every conceivable mode of transport, be that bus rapid transit or kind of train or light rail, i.e. the Lewis, or indeed the Metro North again, and kind of, you know, analysed this and came up with the six proposals shortlisted that were the most cost effective in some respects, but also the most effective in other respects, i.e. kind of touched on the major population centres maybe and made the most sense. So we've got a kind of a menu of options in front of us now, and I suppose the purpose of my meeting is to discuss and debate those menus. Now the options include, say, 2 Lewis lines, one of which would go directly under Drumcondra, kind of going under Fagans and up through Griffith Park, up to Home Farm Road, continuing underground then to Ballymun, and then going up, continuing on to the airport at surface level. Then there's another one, and these are kind of the 2 controversial ones in a way, I suppose, because of the amount of tunnelling involved. The other one then would go kind of from Cabra to Ballymun via Glasnevin Cemetery, going under Glasnevin Cemetery, which could cause a lot of, controversy, I suppose.
Yes. So, first of all, Noel, what I always look at in these things is financing. It seems to me that whatever is in this menu of options or wish list that we describe it cannot be done purely out of public finance. Am I right in thinking that this has to be some form of public-private partnership?
Yeah, and I think, if we look at the Lewis, public-private partnership has worked well. That's not necessarily an ideological stance on my part, but we can just say the Lewis runs well, runs effectively, and they're able to put on late-night services with little hoo-ha, unlike, say, Dublin Bus, where there always seems to be issues whenever it comes to adding new services at flexible hours, unfortunately. Similarly, the Lewis runs on Stephen's Day, where a lot of public transport in Ireland doesn't run, and public-private partnership ultimately has worked. Turns out profit, money which goes back into the public coffers every single year. So, I have to say I'm quite happy with how the Lewis is run.
Okay.
And I think everyone who lives on the line is. So I think, public-private partnership is what we'll be looking at. Sure. And also potentially the public side of it being propped up by the European Investment Bank, which is how the Lewis Cross City is currently being funded as well.
Yes. I mean, in essence, all we are really doing here, Noel, is trying to bring to address the deficits of Northside transport here, because we really have been treated as the poor relation.
Absolutely, yeah. So I mean, like if we took Dublin and we kind of divided it into 4 quadrants, say, with the very northeast of Dublin, southeast Dublin, southwest Dublin, and northwest Dublin, you'd see quickly that northwest Dublin, and in fact a lot of north central Dublin as well, doesn't have a second mode of transport. We're entirely reliant on buses. And buses are great and they're grand, but it's always good to have a diverse mix of modes of transport. Southeast Dublin has the Green Line Lewis and the Dart, goes through mostly southeast Dublin. Southwest Dublin has the Red Line Lewis. That kind of scintilla of northeast Dublin has the Dart then as well, and that's great. But then the north central and northwest areas, we're entirely reliant on the bus. So a bad day for traffic means a bad day for commuters, and there's no other options at all. So I'd be very keen to make sure that the poor relation, as you call it, is a little bit looked after by this government. And having a Northside Transport Minister is important in that respect as well.
Yes. Do you have a preferred option yourself, Noel? Because I was listening to one of your colleagues out there, and she was saying, oh, well, we had to get this going through Ballymun because then it would link up to the airport and so on and so forth. Now, Ballymun and the airport have been, they have been side by side for quite some time, but I'm not necessarily seeing an enormous, what I would call synergy between the two, whether it's hotels or spin-off businesses. Am I being unfair there, or is that potential just not tapped at the moment?
Well, look, I think Ballymun does have a lot of development potential, particularly on the business side of things. Mick, you know yourself, there's a lot of greenfield sites there. And I mean, if we had a direct, say, Lewis link between Ballymun and the airport, and obviously going into the city centre, and then subsequently, and also going to Swords at the other end, I think you would be able to pitch the businesses, M1 adjacent, M50 adjacent, airport adjacent, good transport links, suddenly, and relatively low rent. Suddenly, that's a very compelling picture for a business, I think. Yeah. And it's important that we approach from that kind of business case point of view more than anything else, I think. Ballymun, if you look at it on a map, I mean, it should effectively be the kind of the Ballantyre, the north side, in effect, in terms of distance from the city centre. There's a lot of development potential there, I think. Yeah. And I think it's where I grew up, so I'm always keen to see it develop well and to make sure that locals benefit from that development as well.
You've also, I notice here, Noel, you've put down a dart link from Clongriffin to the airport and Swords. Now, I was out in Clongriffin about 3 months ago, and you could let off a cannon and you wouldn't hit anybody. I mean, quite seriously, Jerry Gannon, I'm sure he's a lovely guy, but should we really be bailing him out on this one and say, I would say if you asked a lot of other people, that should be perhaps from Donamead Station, or it should be from Coolock Shopping Centre or something, Northside Shopping Centre. The Clongriffin, good an idea as it was at the time, really, you possibly have to cut your losses on it.
Yeah, look, I mean, you asked me for my preferred options.
Yeah.
I can tell you my least preferred option is that one. I think it serves it ticks the least boxes, if you like. Like you say, there's no population centre there. Doesn't really benefit anyone. Doesn't come through the northwest of the city at all. Mm-hmm. So therefore, for me, it ticks very, very few boxes, and actually still leaves the northwest, without any kind of second mode of transport, which for me is kind of the purpose of this whole exercise. Mm-hmm. So no, I think the dart link from Clongriffin to the airport and Swords is probably the least realistic of them. And I was a bit disappointed, I have to say, at Irish Rail jumping the gun there last week by trying to preempt the whole thing by making this announcement. I'm sure you saw it on the front page of the Independent when they know that this process is ongoing. The minister will make a decision on which of these 6 modes of transport is chosen. So I don't think it behooves Irish Rail or anybody to try and get out ahead of it and to float, among the public via press releases and glossy brochures, each of these options, trying to sell them to the public.
Sure. Just to let people know, Noel, that they can go and hear a great deal more about this. Is it tomorrow evening?
That's right, yeah. So it's tomorrow night, 7:30 in the Comet Pub in Santry. So we'll be having a few speakers along, representing each of the proposals, I suppose. We'll also be having Dublin Bus along as well. The reason we'll be having Dublin Bus is, even though they're none of the options on the menu, they do obviously manage the entirety of public transport in the northwest area. So I think it'd be good to hear from them as well, just in terms of how they would envision their services reacting or interacting with whatever option we choose, because we don't want to go and build a Lewis line and then realise that Dublin Bus have no plans to link up with it whatsoever. So I think it'd be good to get that.
Yes, we all know the fiasco of the Clontarf battle celebrations when the Dart and the buses really didn't coordinate terribly well.
Exactly.
But that's a separate story. No, you wanted to raise the issue about speed limits in housing estates. Is that a concern out there? Are the hooligans playing up again?
Yeah, no, it is a concern, all right. And the reason for it is there's a lot of rat running right now. One of the negative consequences of people getting back to work and going to their job in the morning is there's more traffic on the roads again in Dublin. Anyone who drives at around 8:30, 9:30 in the morning will absolutely have noticed this. There are 2 things that happen when people get jobs again. The queues at the bars get a bit longer, and the traffic in the morning gets a bit longer. And they're unfortunate things that we just have to put up with as a consequence of people being back to work. But, overall it's good news. However, there are a lot of people using rat runs, particularly in Drumcondra and Glasnevin, trying to avoid Moby Road and Drumcondra Road in particular. So they're coming down through estates and weaving their way through residential areas, which currently in Dublin, if you don't have a speed limit strictly for your road, your default speed limit is 50 kilometres an hour for a lot of residential estates. That is actually quite high, particularly in the context of a 30-kilometre limit being imposed in the city centre. To be honest with you, I think a 30-kilometre limit should be imposed on residential estates rather than in the city centre, indeed. So that's one of the motions that I put down in the City Council. I was glad to get a favourable response from the City Council management, who tell me they are looking into this proposal currently, and they're doing an analysis on it, a kind of a strengths and weaknesses analysis on it, and that they had already imposed I suppose a traffic safe area like this in Marino before, which you're probably familiar with, Mick, I imagine, where they erected many ramps, bollards, and imposed a 30-kilometre speed limit in a lot of the residential areas there. So we think we could use that as a template, and I suppose implement it throughout Drumcondra and Glasnevin, because this all comes about as a consequence of a campaign called Jake's Legacy, who would have been a young man who was hit and unfortunately killed by a car speeding in an estate. I think it was about a year ago now. So if that car had been travelling at 30 kilometres an hour, we would say the scenario that it could have turned out differently. So we think that, in the interest of safety, more than anything else, 30 kilometres seems appropriate. Yes, it would also end rat running.
Okay, they tell me that this sort of thing would have never happened when the godfather of St. Luke was running the area up there. So what can I say, Noel? No, can you stay with us?
I saw him indeed last night. I was watching Liverpool and Chelsea now in Fagans. I caught the last bit of extra time, and sure, there he was indeed. I hadn't seen him in the best part of the year, but
No.
I suppose, a lot of people locally were a bit upset when they heard that story about him being hit with the stick over the head by your man or whatever, when he was out having a pint. So
Yeah.
I think everyone, even in their retirement, kind of, there's no harm in it being out and about.
Nobody should be obliged to endure that. No, if you could stay with us for a few minutes, Noel, because we are now joined in the studio by PeterD Wall, the chanteur extraordinaire.
Great stuff.
Peter, welcome back again.
Thank you very much. Hello, Noel.
How
are you?
Great.
Peter, the last time we were discussing busking regulations, you were in with us and you were actually very supportive of the concept of regulation. Now that we've got the regulations in place, what do you think of them? Because Noel and his colleagues are going to be debating them next week. Am I right on that one, Noel?
You're right, yeah, Mick.
Yeah. Hi, Noel. Yeah, I'm very much in favour of regulation. As you know, I've busked on the street for quite some time, and I love it there. And I love the culture of throwing a hat down and busking. I'm a little bit concerned that the regulations as they're now presented are a bit more domination than regulation. And I don't mean to be negative in any way, because I am in support of regulations. But things like public liability effectively turn a busker into a little business. And I mean, it's a bit of a joke, because you want to be careful not to burst into song going down the street in case somebody asks you to get public liability. So I'm wondering, are you serious about that one? Are you actually going to insist?
How do you feel just overall, Noel? I've described these as more administrative than what I would call a service culture in that sense of the word.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's clear to me that these regulations have been drafted by administrators or bureaucrats indeed, and that they are very, very bureaucratic in nature. I mean, the public liability point is one that I had already raised on the council at the last meeting when this was last debated, and we deferred it again. There was also kind of, very, very, very strict criteria, to do with distance and decibel levels and so on and so forth. And these kind of draft regulations seem like things that are written to almost be broken, because you're not going to have council officials rambling around with trundle wheels measuring the distance between people, or with their stopwatch measuring how long they occupy a slot on grass in 3-4. I think it was meant to be no more than 2 hours at a time, or then going around with their noise meters every day either. So I mean, I think we could have been a lot more sensible about this. We could have just had far clearer black and white rules. And I agree with what you're saying. I think the public liability point, I mean, that's just, again, it's just more bureaucracy and form filling and a small fee attached, which I think will put off a lot of people who maybe just wanted to engage in a bit more, I suppose, casual busking, with which I don't think any shop holders or business owners in the city centre or pedestrians have a problem.
How do you feel about being licensed, Peter? I mean, might you expect to say start with a learner's permit?
Well, yeah. I mean, I suppose the licensing is a little bit of a difficult one. First of all, I think maybe it should be confined to certain streets, because the culture is that you throw a hat down and you sing for your supper. And I really don't want to eliminate that. There are a lot of people who literally sing for their supper, and it's a lot more effective and more entertaining than going out begging. So licensing can be awkward, because where do you go? Most people would have no idea where to even start. So they'd be afraid then that they might be nabbed by maybe a guard that wasn't informed on a particular day.
Or didn't like a song.
They'd like. Yeah, I mean, people love to hear songs. The public, when I was out singing, they said it's great, and you love to see people of all different qualities and ranges, and that's what makes a city. And I think, to be honest with you, I'd like to see Dublin tourism and Irish tourism working with the council to develop this rather than control it. So, the word development is better than the word control. So in terms of licensing, if we could think that way, and by the sounds of it, Noel, you are already thinking that way. Yeah. So I'm saying I want to support you in what you've said about, public liability, about the distance issues. I mean, 3 metres from whose door? The law says we have to be 3 metres from the door of any street trade or any building. Well, there isn't such distance, and who's going to measure the decibels, etc., etc. So I'd like to see more emphasis on the development side of something that's absolutely beautiful in our culture.
Again, Noel, this is quite, if you actually look at the regulation there, somebody coming in here, young people from wherever, part of, if you like, your growing up experiences, you go to foreign cities and busk. You know, I was never talented enough, but lots of friends of mine did it around Europe. It almost is going to eliminate that if they have to get licenses and public insurance, or we create essentially the law seems an ass. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, you're right, and I mean, you know, it will eliminate some of the spontaneity of busking and some of the kind of the colour of the city, I suppose, as you say as well. And there are things that I'd be deeply concerned about. You know, I do think that the introduction of public liability insurance is more than anything else going to assure that people just decide against busking if they're doing it on a casual basis, or if they're young fellas who just want to throw down a hat and sing for their supper. I think they'll probably be in fear that the guards would nab them instead and just will decide not to bother with it. But the other side of the coin as well is that I do think the law would very quickly become an ass, because I just cannot for the life of me see a guard pulling up a 17-year-old or whatever with a guitar because he happens to be 1.8 metres away from a doorway. No. I just cannot see that for the life of me working.
Can I make a comment there,
yes,
Mick?
please.
I think it sounds like you're right, but what happens in practice is there's somebody in a building up above where this busker is, gets a little bit peeved, makes a phone call, and the Garda has to take action. Under law, he has to take action. And then on occasion, and this happens really rarely, you might get a Garda who's a little bit nasty. But the bottom line is that if there is a law, they can use it when they want to. And that's what I'm concerned about. And I'd like to see this, if I can just speak on the decibel thing, Mick, the public liability, I think, should definitely go. It turns us into a business, and that changes everything. But the decibel issue is important, because what we're trying to do is control the sound. And the only reason that I ever turn my volume up, I have to turn it up to full volume to be heard when I'm out on O'Connell Street or on Henry Street, is because the level of noise in the city is absolutely deafening. And I think the council should be moving to reduce the level of noise, and that would bring us in line with a lot of European cities where they've banned amplification, but that's not a problem because you don't need it. So
because the streets are quieter, of course.
And that's the sort of thing I'd love to work with you on. How do we make the streets quiet? How do you stop the buses making so much noise? I mean, they really are loud.
Could I put something to you, Noel? This is an observation, and I'm not trying to be controversial here, but Peter and I, we go back a way. I've seen him perform in the streets. I've also seen other people perform in exactly the same spot, and they're usually what I would call evangelists, for want of a better term. Now, the traditional ones are, you know, they make a certain level of noise, but the African ones, they're hip. And they, I would suggest, might even breach that noise. First of all, do they need to be licensed, and are they subject to noise regulation as well?
I see. So you're talking about kind of religious preachers.
Exactly. Oh yeah. There's one guy down there, and as I say, he's very rocky. That's all I can say. I've captured him because he's such a good performer. But he uses a loud speaker. I would suggest he's probably makes more volume than Peter does, and when Peter is singing.
Great question. Yeah, I wouldn't be 100% certain what exactly would constitute, in inverted commas, a busker. I mean, obviously, this is spoken word, if you like, but you could also, in theory, have spoken word performance art, be it poetry or whatever, on a street corner as well. So, I mean, yeah, it's actually a blurred line to an extent.
It is, isn't it?
You make a good point. I would say it probably constitutes any performer, and therefore it probably would include somebody preaching those religious messages, if you like, through a loudspeaker.
Well, I was just saying, Peter's. I mean, he could be Father Walls, or he's already got the beard, so he could even be the singing rabbi.
Rabbi, definitely.
Rabbi Walls. So this is up for decision now. When is it, Noel?
This is up for decision
on
next
the February
Monday
meeting.
February meeting. So first Monday in February. So that is this Monday coming back.
And is there any wiggle room in it at all, or does it have to go through as proposed by Mary Freehill?
No, it doesn't have to go through as proposed. We could certainly send it back to the committee for further review again if we're not happy with it. Ultimately, I expect it will go to a vote of the council on the evening, though, and I would expect it to be passed currently as it stands. But that can change between now and Monday.
Look, they'll all move out to the suburbs, and then it's a different game. Noel, we'll let you go. Keep up the good work, and we'll catch you again soon.
Great stuff. I look forward to hearing Peter the rapping rabbi on the streets of Dublin sooner or later.
Thank you, Noel. And thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you.
Yes.
All the best. Listen, good talk.
Bye-bye.
Peter, you've been having a hiatus from the street entertainment. It's a bit cold out there, in the sense of the word. Can we expect to see you or hear you back on the streets of Dublin any day soon?
Yeah, I'm hoping to get back out in the summer. Last year, I actually got a really bad cold and I hurt my voice, and I was advised to rest it. So I've rested it, but I have to admit, I've become a little bit soft. And I'm feeling the cold now, whereas I used to feel the cold at all. Maybe I'm just getting old. I don't know, Mick, but I hope to get back out in the summer. I really do.
Yeah.
With a new repertoire, I promise.
That's good. Yes, that will keep the guys in the GPO so happy.
Absolutely.
But more to the point, just before we conclude on this one, Peter, just so people know, I mean, we get an awful lot of this nonsense about how you drove here in a Rolls Royce and you wear Armani suits based on the proceeds of what you earn on the streets. Can people even make a living out of it?
It's difficult. It's difficult. I do very well, and I know from talking to the other buskers.
But you're considered a class act. I mean, you are in the upper echelons of street entertainment.
There are times you'd come along and you'd look at my basket and say, "Oh my, that man's making a lot of money now," and that does happen. It's like any business; it goes in waves. But the trouble is, it rains or things happen, and the bottom line is, I found it hard to pay my rent, even though I did very, very well.
Yeah.
So no, and if we could sell CDs, but we can't sell CDs because
then you'd be a business.
Then we'd be a business and we'd have to pay public liability. So I'm not sure how to resolve it, Mick.
Okay, well, that's taken us to the end of today's programme. I'd just like to thank our fabulous engineer, Aoife, on the desk. Sean Brophy's coming up with Midweek Music Miscellany. Thanks to Noel Rock. He's having a meeting tomorrow evening up there in the Comet in Santry. And I'll be back in a week's time. Take care.